CIG throws out terms like Agile, sprints, backlog, tasks, rule sets, and so on. So I thought I'd explain what these terms really mean across a series of videos and how they apply to Star Citizen's development. It helps us as a community to get more out of their videos when CIG uses these terms. So this week, we'll be talking about Agile and sprints, how that impacts the roadmap, the feature pushes we see, and how player feedback influences game designer plans. Now, as some disclaimers, I'm going to take liberties in my descriptions just to make things as relatable as possible to everyone. And a lot of these things I'll talk about can be applied with many variations to different organizations, including CIG. So, we'll start with the term Agile. CIG has said they are taking an agile approach to developing the game. Use of the term agile here is more than the common adjective of just being agile. Agile is an actual set of principles that guides teams in their development to produce their products. To describe agile, I'll put it in contrast to a more traditional approach. Traditionally, projects will come up with a set of goals and objectives, major features they want a game to have. They do that in Agile as well. But for the more traditional approach, to be able to predict when they should be able to complete these goals, they break down those features into more and more granular bits, estimate all the tiny bits, and add it up to give a final prediction of when something like a game will be delivered. This seems pretty good on paper, but it has issues. For one, you spend considerable time up front figuring out all the details of the game before you even start development. So there's no playable game while trying to derive that level of detail for an accurate estimate. That doesn't work well for a crowd-funded game where backers would like to have something to play during the years it typically takes a game to be developed.
How old do you think I am anyway?
Secondly, it has a tendency to feature lock the development. To try to stay on track with the forecasted schedule, you don't have a great deal of flexibility to introduce new ideas or change your mind partway through.
I am altering the deal.
Even if they are good ideas. It's not that you can't change, it's just not part of the approach where you want to figure out as much as possible of the game as you can and estimate all that up front. The feeling is that this gives you a more predictable end state. Whether that actually works in real life has been highly debated, but that's the idea. In this more traditional development approach, changes are therefore viewed as a bad thing.
I thought there were no bad ideas.
That's a lie.
That's a bad one.
That cost time and resources that can negatively impact the established schedule. My own observation is that even with this long-term view and stability of direction, it's challenging to be able to predict that far ahead.
That's because it hasn't been invented yet.
With Star Citizen and the Agile approach they are using, it takes a different tack. Agile is about continual cycles of inspection and adaptation on what's being developed. You still start with the features and outcomes you want. For example, we want there to be mining, salvage, and other careers. We want piracy to be the taking of other people's goods and introduce a built-in player-based risk. That sort of thing. It's the kind of theory crafting we used to hear about and got excited about with the game. But this is where Agile deviates from more traditional approaches. They evolve the game, building and figuring out the details of the features as they go, and intentionally change the product as they go. They don't try to figure out everything up front, but build out small bits, see if they like it, add to it, change it, or scrap it if need be. The hope is that this evolutionary approach learns as it goes and tries to produce the best experience it can for each feature. So, changing how things work midstream
somehow managed to install and activate a subroutine in the programming code, thereby changing the conditions of the test.
is actually an expected part of the Agile principles that Star Citizen has adopted. This idea of evolving the product takes us to another term they use called sprints. In my last video, we looked at staggered development and the associated release cycles, but we're going to take a look inside of one of those development cycles and examine what happens a little closer. Sprints occur inside of the releases or game updates that we get. Sprints are short development cycles the teams undergo to create a little portion of the product, take a look at it to see if it's giving the desired results, then go through another iteration to either continue in the same direction or change the direction in iterations. These sprint iterations are not the same as the quarterly releases we're used to getting. There are actually several sprints happening within each of those release cycles.
Each of our sprints is basically 2 weeks, so rather than be able to do 3 sprints of 6 weeks, actually it works out we can do more like 8 sprints altogether.
A typical sprint in the industry is about 2 to 3 weeks. Any shorter to 1 week doesn't give the development team much time to put together even a small increment of a feature and retest things. Much longer, like 4 to 5 weeks, and you're having to wait a long time as a development team before you can examine the feature to see if it's coming together like you want. The sprint links attempt to reduce the amount of time that may have to be spent on something that isn't going to give you the desired result, but still allowing enough time to produce something useful. There are probably several adjustments and changes to the game from sprint to sprint that we never see. We just see the product at its current state for the release. These sprint-to-sprint examinations within CIG are not just bug fixes, but trying to see if they are actually getting the results that they want.
You know, we had it with no-fly zones, where we reviewed it, and the feature was pretty much there. It just wasn't ready.
In discussions about the roadmap, particularly lately, we hear a lot of, "It's not ready." And we see things getting moved out into the future. "It's not ready" doesn't always mean that it took longer than they thought it would, though it could mean that. In Agile, that can also mean that the feature isn't providing the player experience they were after. So the desired result can often involve a rather intangible, like, is it fun?
Art thou feeling it now, Mr. Krabs?
Or is it an interesting mechanic involving some mental and skill aspects? That sort of thing. The feedback we give CIG directly with each patch update adds to their own internal feedback loop mechanism, but they are doing their own evaluations as well more frequently with each of these sprints. The industry calls these a sprint review, and it's a built-in part of Agile execution. There's also a sprint retrospective activity where the team briefly looks at how their own development execution went, not just the game product. And they try to adjust, remove barriers to progress, and just do a little better each time.
Now, there's been a lot of work done it's on basically how we edit and how we work on things. Let's say a space station is made up of multiple OCs, planets made up of multiple OCs. Now, what we've been doing is trying to allow the designers and the artists to go into a high-level OC, crack it open, and then be able to edit and adjust things. And so it increases the workflow versus having to, okay, I have my big OC that has everything, and then I go to one of those smaller OCs and open up a different editor window, and then basically just keep on stacking editor windows open until I find the one that I want. So we're working on things that increase our workflow and increase our iteration time. If something takes 20, 30 minutes to check on and see if you got it right, and like you can only do that so many times in the day, but obviously if we can get that down to a minute to check on it, then you're going to be able to get more iterations on it, make sure it's right, and then basically move on to the next task. So we want to tighten that loop as much as possible.
The sprint review that helps confirm continuation or influences changes is combined with the overall set of planned functionality desired for the release. These more release-based goals are created in support of those larger game goals, and are most likely what they talk about for their yearly planning. But these initial release goals are combined with the findings at each sprint to mold the game accordingly through this Agile approach. So even what they planned is just a starting point that is expected to be adjusted as they go. You can see how our feedback is important, but certainly tempered with the planned features that are also getting modified and rolled out bit by bit in these sprint iterations. some game loops might feel a bit stale or repetitive now, or as they call it, a Tier 0 implementation with planned improvements. But they want to give us something to play when it's ready, even though there are those planned improvements and refinements already on the table.
Flush.
Our feedback and CIG's observations of how we play and execute the Tier 0 version influences those plans, which is what makes Agile a nice fit. The Agile approach welcomes changes and even relies on it to move things forward and achieve the desired results. It allows opportunities for ongoing internal refinement as well as more periodic feedback with each quarterly update. Agile, though, can also feel more tumultuous to customers, which are the players in this case, because things are constantly changing, evolving, getting pushed back, and all of that. In the traditional method, you've always got this target, so it feels stable, even if industry data says those original estimates are often not met. Agile has this constant reminder every few weeks with each sprint and possible roadmap update that things are changing, so there's more of a perception issue there. This month, I'm giving away an Aurora MR with game package, courtesy of the Reed organization. Reed is involved with engineering that includes mining and salvage mechanics, science, exploration, and transport logistics for cargo hauling. They also have a defense division, which keeps all your mining and cargo running activities safe. Reed has a focus on collaboration and a sense of respect, both within the organization and beyond to the rest of the community. Feel free to like and subscribe, use my referral code and all that jazz, and I'll be talking to you later.